Okay, hi everyone. It's great to be back for another session here at the Building on Bitcoin virtual event. Again, my name is Andre Serrano. I work on product at the Stacks Foundation. And this time I'm joined by Kenny Rogers, the developer advocate at the Stacks Foundation. Today we're going to be doing a deep dive on Nakamoto, laying out everything that you all need to know about this upcoming network upgrade to the Stacks network, what it means for users and developers alike, and what are some of the key technical changes that are introduced as part of this. So, Kenny, welcome. I'd love if we could just start off at a high level. Can you talk about what exactly is the Nakamoto upgrade and what are some of the key changes that are introduced?
Yeah, so the Nakamoto upgrade is the upcoming and one of the biggest upgrades that's happened to the Stacks chain so far. And there's really two key changes that it brings, and that's fast blocks and Bitcoin finality. So when I say fast blocks, right now the timing of Stacks blocks is tied to the timing of Bitcoin blocks, and that just makes for a really slow transaction confirmation time, really slow user experience. We've talked about other chains on this event so far, like Ethereum and Solana and all these some of these smaller alt chains as well that have really fast, snappy transaction times. And so what Nakamoto does is it'll bring that transaction confirmation time down from whatever time it takes for that Bitcoin block to confirm down to the order of like several seconds. And so fast blocks is one of two key technical changes. And then the second is Bitcoin finality. And what we mean when we say Bitcoin finality, the way that I like to describe it is it's the point at which you can consider a Stacks transaction as secure and as hard to reverse as a Bitcoin transaction. So those are really the two key changes that Nakamoto brings are the fast blocks and the Bitcoin finality.
Yeah, fast, secure, programmable Bitcoin. That's the way that I like to think about it in a sentence. Okay, Kenny, I'd like to go just a level deeper on some of these changes to really understand the how all of this works. So, can you just help us understand how does the Nakamoto upgrade really improve the functionality and performance of the Stacks network?
Yeah, so those two key changes are kind of brought about by a couple of key technical modifications that are happening to the chain. And then the first one is that as Stacks stands before Nakamoto, miners are cryptographically selected to mine a new Stacks block, and they do that in lockstep one-to-one with Bitcoin blocks. Whereas after Nakamoto, what's going to happen is miners are still going to be cryptographically selected, but what they're going to be selected for is to mine for a specified tenure, and that tenure is going to correspond to a Bitcoin block time. But within that tenure, they're going to be mining several Stacks blocks very, very rapidly. But then the other half of that equation is, whereas before miners were responsible for both proposing the content of the blocks and broadcasting them out to the chain, what's going to happen now is that stackers in the ecosystem will take on the additional role of becoming what are called signers. And so miners have the first step of the new block creation, and that's to propose new blocks. But that's all they do in this case is they propose the new content of the blocks. Then what happens is those blocks get sent over to signers, and those signers are the ones who are in charge of validating the blocks and agreeing upon the validation of those blocks. And then they're the ones that actually then will broadcast that new block out to the other nodes. And only when these signers have reached a 70% agreement that the block should be included, will it then get broadcasted and picked up by the other nodes. So it introduces a little bit of a cooperative relationship. And this new tenure-based structure is how miners are able to create blocks really, really quickly. And then how we can tie that same change in roles to the Bitcoin finality side of things is the additional role that these signers will take on outside of just validating the blocks themselves and pushing them up to the other nodes, is they're actually going to make sure that the miner is building on top of the correct Stacks chain tip. So the way that Stacks works before Nakamoto, if you what you can call the security budget or the amount of money that it would cost to change the history on the Stacks transaction chain, that was separate from the Bitcoin security budget. So let's say, for example, I, as a malicious miner, wanted to change the history of the last 5 Stacks blocks. Well, that would only cost me as much as it would cost to mine 6 Stacks blocks, basically. It's like an N+1 type formula. I didn't actually have to override any of Bitcoin security budget. And the reason for that is that because I, as a new miner, I could orphan recently confirmed transactions and basically fork the chain and create what I wanted to be the canonical version of the chain now. So what's going to happen now in Nakamoto is that forking is not going to be allowed anymore because as part of a miner starting their tenure, they have to confirm the previously agreed upon block and they have to build on top of it. And if they don't, then the signers will reject that block. and the miner's not going to be able to build on it. They're not going to be able to get their Coinbase reward. And so it forces the miner to build up on top of the canonical chain tip. And then what happens is every tenure, when the miner switches to the next miner's tenure, the signers will initiate a tenure change transaction. And part of that is that last block that was mined, and that all gets written to the Bitcoin chain every tenure change. And so once two tenure changes have passed, a Stacks transaction can be considered settled to Bitcoin and will have the same security, same finality, same cost to reverse that transaction as to reverse a Bitcoin transaction in the same block. So that's kind of the technical overview of how all of that works. Um, and so yeah, I think that about covers it. The important part to I think the important thing to know there is that there's now this cooperative relationship between miners and stackers, and that's really what's going to allow both of these things to happen, so that they both only get their economic incentive if they faithfully fulfill these roles that they have now.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very clear explanation. And I know it's a little bit technical, but you did a really good job of sort of breaking down a lot of the main changes that we're going to see as part of this Nakamoto upgrade. And it really is a fundamental upgrade to the way that the Stacks network operates, and mainly by separating the role of block production so that signers take on this additional cooperative relationship with miners in order to advance the chain. So, Kenny, with that said, I'd love to switch gears a little bit to talk a little bit more about the developer and user experience and what people should expect when transacting on Stacks Nakamoto. So, from a developer's perspective, why do you think Nakamoto is so exciting, and how exactly does it impact the developer experience?
Yeah, I think it goes back to those two core changes, the fast blocks and the Bitcoin finality. So if you are a developer that has had to deploy and test on a test net that has slow transaction confirmation times, then you know how much of a pain it can be. You have your local development environment, sure, but then once it's time to deploy it to testnet and start experimenting and testing things in a live environment, when you have to sit there and wait 10, 20, 30 some minutes, sometimes up to an hour for a test transaction to confirm, it really slows down your development process and can be extremely frustrating. And so one of the things that I'm most excited about as a developer are those fast block times, because you have a significantly faster feedback loop for you to be able to test your application. And it's just a much more enjoyable developer experience. And all these things are going to be wrapped up in the local developer tools as well. And so you'll get those benefits everywhere. But then at a more deeper, almost philosophical level, the Bitcoin finality is anybody that's building in this ecosystem is building because they want to build towards a better financial and economic system. And so just knowing that you're building on something that has that Bitcoin finality, I think makes a big difference. And, we heard some people earlier talk about how you kind of have to have a mission focused mindset to build in this space. Otherwise, you're going to get burned out. And so just knowing that you're building on a chain that is being built to be as secure and decentralized as possible, I think really helps to just know that you're building on the right thing when you're building for the right reasons. And so that's kind of where I see developers coming in. But the flip side of this equation, that I would like to hear your perspective on, is kind of how you think this is going to affect the user experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it impacts the end user in a lot of the ways that you described it impacting the developer experience. But just to go like another level on that, I think fast blocks and the overall scalability of the Stacks network under Nakamoto will see a significant UX improvement. I think the rest of the crypto industry has gotten used to really fast block times, and we found ways to solve this sort of scalability issue. But when transacting on the Bitcoin L1, transactions are still taking 10 to 20 minutes. It can take up to an hour for those transactions to finalize. And since Stacks blocks are currently produced one-to-one with Bitcoin blocks, we're seeing a lot of those same issues happening on the Stacks network. And so I think users are going to experience a significant improvement in the ways that they can transact with Bitcoin that should provide much better experiences overall for the end user. And I think the same thing, as you started to allude to, with the overall security on the Stacks network. And so the fact that Stacks transactions will settle down to Bitcoin through the proof of transfer consensus method, while also being able to ensure that those transactions are receiving the same level of security as the Bitcoin L1, means that those transactions can't be dropped or reorged, which should be an improvement in how most end users are interacting with the protocol. The last thing that I want to mention is just this impact to stackers, because I think this is really significant. Because basically, stacking is one of the products in the Stacks ecosystem that I think has clear product market fit, right? Like users love to be able to earn a Bitcoin yield as part of stacking. I think we've seen that through all sorts of market cycles. And basically, with this upgrade, it means that stackers are going to need to do some additional work in order to get that Bitcoin yield by taking on these additional responsibilities. And those responsibilities help to ensure the liveness of the Stacks network, and eventually they'll even be responsible for validating SBTC deposit and withdrawal transactions. So I know we'll get to that a little bit later, but that's a big change to currently how some users experience stacking. And while that's been a useful way to bootstrap the chain in the first couple of years on mainnet, I think moving forward, there are some significant changes to what users should expect. So on that topic of the stack signer, Kenny, could you give us just a quick overview of what running a stack signer should actually entails, and what should signers expect when they're getting started with that?
Yeah, so there's really two main things that you need to do as a signer in the Stacks ecosystem, and that's that you need to run a signer node that's running the signing software, and then you need to conduct your stacking operations. So earlier when I was talking about the new technical changes that are enabling Nakamoto, the stackers are the ones that are fulfilling this signing role, and so they have this now additional responsibility, and basically fulfilling the role of stacking and signing. That's now going to be compensated by the miners, and they're going to be distributed with that Bitcoin yield. And so what it looks like to actually fulfill that role and take on that responsibility is you need to run the signer software, and you need to run that alongside a Stacks node and a Bitcoin node. Now you can connect to a hosted Bitcoin node if that's easier, but we do recommend running your own just because you have more control over how everything's working. It's easier to troubleshoot that way. But the main thing is running the signer software. And what the signer software is going to do is it's going to continually pull the chain and look for new blocks that are being proposed. And it's going to run the functions that need to be run in order to validate that block and make sure that it is following the rules of the chain. And if it's not, then your signer software is not going to generate the signature to validate that block and agree that it should be proposed to the chain. And so really what happens here is you're doing two things at once. You're running that signer software, and then you're conducting stacking operations. And usually the best way to do this is each of these things are going to be associated with their own Stacks account. So you have a Stacks account associated with your signer, and then you'll have a Stacks account where you're conducting your stacking operations. And on the signer side of things, what's going to be happening is you're actually going to be generating a signature using that signer, that Stacks account associated with your signer. And you're going to be using that to sign the new blocks that are coming in. And when I say you, the signer software is going to be doing this automatically. So it's not like you have to sit there and like manually check and make sure all these blocks are validated and coming in. The software is going to conduct these operations automatically. But then the flip side of that is you need to also fulfill your stacking role. And there's a few different ways that this can happen. The simplest way is as a solo stacker. So if you have enough to meet the stacking threshold minimum, you can operate as a solo stacker. And what this now means is that you'll have to run a signer and also conduct your normal stacking operations. And the main change on the stacking side of things is that you now have to pass in a valid signer signature into your stacking transactions. And so basically, in order to stack now, you have to do one of two things. You either have to be running your own signer, or you have to work with a signer that has agreed to allow you to stack on their behalf. And in that case, what they'll do is they'll provide you with their signer signature that then you can go and pass into these stacking transactions. And the flow looks a little bit different if you're either delegating as a stacker or if you're operating a pool. So if you're a stacker that normally delegates your stacks to a pool operator, you don't now need to go and run your own signer also. So this is, I think, where the majority of people in the stacking ecosystem currently are, is they're participating in a pool and they're delegating their stacks to the pool operator to stack on their behalf. In this case, it's the pool operator's responsibility to run that signer. So what's going to happen is I, as a stacker, I'm going to delegate my stacks to the pool, give my permission to delegate my stacks to the pool. That pool operator is then going to say, okay, yes, I'm delegating this. And then they're going to aggregate all that. commit it as a single stacking transaction. And when they do that is when they're passing in their signer signature. So depending on exactly how you want to stack and run a signer, there's a couple different arrangements of what you can do. But that's the general like overview of how that actually works. And we have a bunch of documentation if you just go to docs.stacks.co if you're interested in filling any one of these roles. If you want to be a signer, solo stacker, pool operator, or a delegator, you can go and see exactly how all that works and what exactly your role is, what actions you need to take to kind of fill that out. So that's how the process works and kind of what signing and stacking looks like from like an actual like logistical technical perspective. But I kind of want to get your perspective and move into talking a little bit about from the ecosystem perspective. So there's been a ton of effort that's gone into kind of bootstrapping what we want to be a robust signer ecosystem. And you've been really kind of leading the way on a lot of those efforts. So I kind of want to hear from you on what that experience has been like and what you guys have learned along that path.
Yeah, definitely. So really, we've spent the past 6 months or so really developing a robust validator ecosystem. And so I'm happy to share that as of today, we really have a best-in-class group of validators that are participating in becoming a Stacks signer. This includes both institutional stacking providers as well as more retail, community-focused stacking pools. And so we've been working with validators that can bring a lot of new capabilities to the Stacks ecosystem. That includes everyone from Bitcoin miners to validators that are bringing new use cases to the Stacks ecosystem, or even unlocking new geographic regions and helping us activate communities in different areas. So, it's been great to see that level of engagement with getting set up with running a Stacks validator. And there's a few things that I've learned throughout this process. I think first is that it's important to select validators that are going to be in the trenches with you, frankly. I think that the validators that we have are responsive, they are proactive, and they've really been working with us over the past several months to update documentation and catch bugs early. And I'm sure that it's been a lot of this really proactive testing that has helped ensure that the 2.5 upgrade that went out earlier this week really was smooth through all the testing and proactive measures that these validators have taken. I think the second thing is really just the importance of good communication with these validators. So onboarding a network of 20 plus validators requires a lot of coordination, and we've been really trying to provide a white glove service in how we really onboard these validators, help them to troubleshoot, make sure that we're logging that sort of feedback and sending it back to the Stacks core engineers. And so really having the good communication with our validators and selecting for folks that are going to really be proactive in how they're working with us as we go from DevNet to testnet to mainnet, I think has been a really important thing to select for. And obviously becoming a Stacks validator is completely open and permissionless, and anyone can choose to run a Stacks validator. But those are just some of the things that we've noticed in terms of actually getting this ecosystem up and running. Kinney, on that note, I'd love to transition a little bit to talk about what people should expect next as far as the Nakamoto rollout plan. So phase one was just completed this week. Could you talk a little bit about what exactly was included in this release and what should everyone expect for phase two when that comes out?
Yeah, so the Nakamoto rollout plan has been pretty carefully and intentionally designed to be this two-phase process. And the reason for that goes back to how I was describing the technical setup earlier, where these signers and stackers, their role is now going to be consensus critical in Nakamoto, and they're going to have two different roles that they have to fulfill in the signing and the stacking. So what phase one did is it activated the new POX4 contract, which includes the new stacking rules. So what this means is that now during phase one, all of the stackers that were previously stacking before and any new stackers that want to go online, they now have this time during phase one to get their signers up and running and make sure that that process is running smoothly and making sure that they have everything working the way that it needs to be before it becomes consensus critical in phase two. And so the main reason behind rolling it out in two phases like this was to provide that buffer to make sure that all of the effort that's gone into building this signer validator ecosystem that you're talking about, that we can actually get that up and running and rolling smoothly in the new environment before it becomes consensus critical in phase two. And then when that happens in the activation phase, that's when we'll see these new things that we've been talking about that are going to be more apparent to users and developers, like the fast blocks and the Bitcoin finality.
Yeah, that's right. And I guess it's probably worth calling out here that as of the 2.5 upgrade on Monday, everyone's STX has been unlocked. And so it's important to, if you want to continue earning that Bitcoin yield, make sure you go ahead and restack. We've already been working with all the major stacking pools in the ecosystem to get ready for that. So you can go to Stacking DAO, you can go to Fastpool and make sure to restack and continue earning that Bitcoin yield. So I know we're coming up on time, Kenny, but maybe we can like start to wrap up here and just talk a little bit about what's coming next after Nakamoto and any other concluding thoughts that you want to share with the community.
Yeah, so I think the two big things that are coming after Nakamoto that Nakamoto was necessary to enable that I'm really excited about are SBTC and Clarity WASM. And so SBTC, we've talked a lot about, people have heard a lot about it. We've been talking about this concept of two-way bridges that are as trust minimized as possible. And so SBTC is Stack's version of that two-way trust minimized bridge to bridge your Bitcoin back and forth between the L1 and the L2. That's been in the works and in development, and has a ton of thought and effort has gone into the best way to design that. And so I'm excited for that to continue to be worked on, to have a lot of the effort that's been focused on Nakamoto be able to shift into making that a reality. And then the other big one is Clarity WASM, which is really going to add even more speed to the chain and to how fast transactions are processed. And we won't go into the details, the technical details of how that works, but basically it means that Clarity transactions are going to be able to be executed significantly faster than they are right now. So we've got the first speed increase with Nakamoto fast blocks, then we'll have an additional speed increase when Clarity WASM comes out. So those are the two big things that I'm really excited about. And then as far as, especially developers can get involved, there's really two places I'd probably send people. The first is just to the docs. It's docs.stacks.co. This is going to take you to a start here page, which is going to direct you wherever you need to go, learn about how Nakamoto works, how you can get started building on it. And the second place is something I'm really excited about. We just partnered with Learn Web3, who's a huge educational player in the Web3 space. And they just kickstarted their Stacks developer degree, which is going to be 4 courses teaching, going super in depth into how to build on Stacks. And so they just released the first course, Intro to Stacks. And so I highly recommend any developers interested in building on Stacks, go check that out. Their domain is learnweb3.io.
Okay, thank you, Kenny. Well, everyone, this pretty much concludes our panel. There you have it on everything you need to know about the Nakamoto upgrade coming this spring and really kicking off Bitcoin L2 summer. So I think now's the time to start building on Bitcoin, go visit the docs, and yeah, thank you.
Thanks.